Good morning. So, if you hadn't looked at the purple sheet in your program, my topic today is love, the magic ingredient. So speaking of ingredients, I think something we can all relate to here in this community is food. Yeah, we all seem to delight in coming together and noshing together, don't we? Well, I think my fascination and my enjoyment of food, not just eating it, but preparing it, came from spending so much time with my grandmother in France, Granny, we called her, and my mom, we called her Mom, who were both wonderful, wonderful cooks. And I think my favorite time when I was watching them prepare a meal, especially if it was some variation on something or new dish that they were trying out, was that moment of the taste test. You know, it had cooked for a while, and now they were tasting it to see if it needed anything. And I think I was particularly fascinated when there was that look on either of their faces that said, no, something was off. Either it was bland or it just didn't taste good. And what really fascinated me about it is that both Mom and Khani knew exactly what to do when that happened. It's like, I will remember how Khani one time was trying this recipe for a zucchini puree that, you know, when I tasted it and she tasted it, I mean, honestly, wet cardboard would have been just as delicious. And from that, a little grinding of some fresh nutmeg. I think she did a little bit with some mashed potatoes to give it a little bit better consistency. And then crème fraîche. And oh my God, it was delicious. Or the time that Mom, you know, throwing together, she was an expert at taking all the leftovers in the fridge and making something out of it. And it usually had some kind of an Asian flavor to it. And tasting something and going, And again, it was grated ginger and a little dab of sherry. And again, magic, magic. I remember even one time when it was one of the first few times that I was hosting the Christmas dinner for the family. And I love to cook, and I tried this recipe. I know there was quite a bit of wine in the recipe, and you could make it in advance. And I tasted it. Nuh-uh. And I had no clue. But luckily, you know, I had my phone call, my Christmas morning phone call with my grandmother. So I'm going, Connie! And I told her what was in the dish, and she just listened. Now, we're talking, she's 6,000 miles away, right? Hearing this, and I explained, you know, what I was perceiving in terms of the flavor and all that. She goes, oh, chérie, no problem. She says, can you get some mushrooms? If so, get some sliced mushrooms, saute them in butter, and then add a little cognac or brandy, flame it, cook it down, cook out all the alcohol so it just gets this nice rich flavor. Add that to the dish. The granny who saved Christmas. It was awesome. I mean, both Mom and Khani just had that knack for knowing that certain something to add that would bring everything together and make it a delicious experience. Now, you know, I would consider myself a good cook, and I enjoy cooking, but I'll tell you, if something doesn't turn out right, it's very hit and miss if I can figure out what to do with it. I don't necessarily have that same knack. However, I will tell you, as one who has studied science of mind for years, and all of my training to become a practitioner and to be a minister and working in this community has led me to know that when we are having unsavory experiences in life, there is one and only one magic ingredient that we need to bring forth to transform it. Can everyone guess, if you need to look at the title of my talk, that ingredient would be love. Yes, thank you. Okay, you can go home. We're done. You know, in Science of Mind, we teach that any suffering that we experience is the result of some false idea that we are separate from God. And love being the core nature of God, whenever we're feeling separate from love. We're feeling separate from God, and that is what creates all the suffering and undesirable experiences out there in the world. So any ideas of not being enough, or that sense of lack that we have in ourselves, you know, that I'm just not enough this, or I'm too much this, that needs to be changed, we are not feeling the sense of love and appreciation for the goodness that lies within us, to just appreciate we're evolving. Yes, there are going to be ways that we don't necessarily live up to our potential, but there's so much goodness there, and we're not appreciating how much greater that goodness is than anything that we might want to step into as a greater expression of love and goodness in the world. If we're feeling our connection with love, then nothing anyone does out there, if they're behaving in unloving ways, will disturb us. You know, we can look at those unloving behaviors and call forth compassion and just know that person is on their journey. They're at this place in consciousness that's producing that kind of behavior, but we don't have to feel distraught about it. We can feel our own wholeness, and we can then decide what's the most loving thing to do. We may have to release them from our lives, but we can do so with a sense of, bless you, and may you find your happiness in your own way. And looking through the eyes of love, we're not disturbed by those situations of lack or disease or discord in the world as much as we have this response that there's some good for us to bring to it. The impulse of love in us is to say there's a way to make good of what is, and to offer a prayer, be generous with our time, with our money, whatever it is that we can do to transform that into something more pleasant. You know, instead, I think we tend to fall into the patterns of, well, I could love myself more if you fill in the blank. I could love them if they would just, or I could feel better when these situations out there change and look more like. See, that pattern of thinking constricts the flow of love within us. That impulse toward experiencing and expressing goodness, that's the impulse of love. And we can call it forth any time. But instead, we're focusing on what's wrong. I mean, okay, maybe not anyone here, but you know, when we give these talks, you get to take them out in the world to tell other people, right? Personally, you know, my greatest lesson around this in terms of seeing this principle, understanding, and putting it into application and seeing the results of that came in, yes, you get to take another trip with me back into my corporate days in corporate America. And the last company that I worked for, I was there for almost 20 years. And you know, I'll tell you that in my counseling that I've been able to do over the years, that I do currently, I frequently run into this experience of people feeling discouraged by the jobs that they're in. And I was one of those people at one time. Over the years, I think I've come to the conclusion that it's great. I mean, it's absolutely great if we're in a career that we love, that we feel brings us great joy, where we experience varying degrees of success. But those careers do not define us, and I think it's really important for us to realize that. You know, if for any reason that career that you're in, if you happen to be in something that you love to do, if for any reason that is taken away from you, you can no longer do that. God's love, God's joy, God's abundance, God's creativity in you is intact. It's still there to be shared, to be experienced, and to be expressed. And I think we've all seen that some individuals suffer tremendously when their careers come to an end because they so identified their value with those careers. You know, they fall into this, I can only love myself or my life, or I can only be loved and appreciated if I'm doing such and such. Well, that just isn't true. And what's also not true is that we can't find joy and fulfillment in whatever job that we might be in, even if it's not our first choice of what we might want to do. That was my dilemma. You know, I often, recently I shared in one of my talks that the way my 20 years in the corporate this last corporate position went, I'd say about the first 10 were in an environment that was really not pleasant, a tremendous amount of stress, employees not necessarily being valued and inspired and uplifted. And then the last 10 were absolutely blissful. They were wonderful. But I didn't have to wait for those last 10 years to be able to have joy in my experience. See, even in those times when things weren't going the way I wanted to, I learned that we still have the capacity to bring forth love and goodness and creativity and joy into those moments. And so I have to say, bless the practitioner who pointed me in that direction. You know, she informed me, you know, by saying that you can't feel any joy or fulfillment until your job changes, you're denying God's presence within and around you now. Well, my inner response was, if you didn't see that, let me, okay? It was like, what? And then I realized she was absolutely right. She was absolutely right. I wasn't seeing God in what was going on. And so she asked me to become mindful and make note of my ways that I was focusing on things I didn't like about my job versus things that I could do to make a positive impact. And so I had to start becoming aware. And that's where the first step was in mindfulness. And that's where my meditation practice had really helped me, because in meditation, we learn to just step back and observe what's going on. I love right now that we're offering this 3-week workshop with Terry Roberts on mindful meditation, on Vipassana, which trains us to do that. If you missed this last Saturday, there are 2 more coming and you're allowed to join, so I encourage it. Because by my noticing, you know, you've heard so many times what we focus on increases. A lot of times we don't even know what we're focusing on. And by my realizing how much of the time I was falling into this pattern of thinking where little whiny Mark, I don't know where he came from, but there was this whiny voice about, oh, it's just so unfair, you know, when I noticed that, I could notice how useless that was, how that wasn't serving me, and my assignment from the practitioner was to look for some positive thing, some way I could express love. And sometimes it was within the context of my job. I suddenly realized, okay, by taking care of this customer service issue, I'm doing something positive for someone else. That's the impulse of love. But sometimes it wasn't about that. Sometimes it was about seeing how busy my staff were and going and getting the coffee pot and walking it around and pouring them coffee, or stopping to talk with someone that I knew was going through a difficult time. These were different ways that I could still feel that love moving through me. And of course, as I started on that little journey and shifting things around, then the perfect individual to really exemplify this for me came into my experience. I started to notice one of the administrative assistants to vice president, who, despite how incredibly stressful the work was for that organization, she just always had this air of peace and kindness and just an upbeat attitude. And so one day after a staff meeting, when she was still there, I managed to have just a little conversation with her. And I asked her, I said, you know, you always seem to be happy in this job. And I know it's not an easy job, you know. Where does that come from? And she said, well, what had happened, her story was that she's the parent of 5 children, but she was a widow. She had been very, very happy as a homemaker. That was her calling in life, so she felt. But when her husband died, that wasn't an option anymore. And she had worked as a secretary before, so she had some great organizational skills that allowed her to step in and work as an administrative assistant to this vice president in our company. And she said in the beginning, when she came in to the office environment and just saw the stress, she just thought, oh, this is absolutely brutal. It took her a moment to adapt to that. But what she noticed is that our VP had such an incredibly intense schedule. She said she realized he sometimes doesn't even have time to get up and go to the restroom when he needs to. And so she made it her mission to try to help with that. And one of the first ways is she realized, I know he likes coffee, but he never has time to go get it. He never asked her to get him coffee, but she started bringing it in and pouring it for him. She would make sure, she would check with him if she needed to push some people away so he could go take his bathroom breaks when he needed to. She said she took it from there to realizing that he liked to walk. And so she scheduled things on his schedule such that every day she'd kick him out for 15 minutes to go take his walk. And she started making sure he got some healthy things to eat for lunch. And it expanded to, in our staff meetings, she was always bringing in some healthy things and saying, look, guys, I know you have enough of the donuts. Have some good, healthy stuff. Doesn't that sound a lot like mothering, nurturing energy? She wasn't in that role that she said she really wanted to, but those qualities were able to be expressed in this other form. And granted, she was a great administrator as well. She had great skills there. But that wasn't her highest gift that she offered to all of us. And that opened me to seeing ways that I could have a positive impact in my workplace, whether it was within the context of my job responsibilities, or if it was, like I said, just bringing that cup of coffee or chatting with an employee, or being open to seeing ways that we could share laughter and love. And the affirmation I was working with at the time was, I'm an expression of God's love in all that I do, and also God's love surrounds me at all times. And the more I looked at that and kept working with that, the more I saw ways that God's love could operate through me, the more I saw how God would be present in the workplace. Like those times people would gather in the coffee room just to relieve some stress and talk and just, get it all out. There was so much love unfolding in that. God was there. I just hadn't been noticing it. So at that time, I would say it was about 2 years before the other company took over and the work environment changed. For 2 years, the job didn't change, but my attitude toward it changed tremendously. And I had a whole different experience of joy and fulfillment. Just like the administrator had told me, every day she would wake up thinking, boy, I want to get in there to support her VP. She had such a calling to do that. I felt a calling to be there because there were ways I could express love and givingness that made me feel good. And this doesn't just apply to work. This applies to all areas of our lives. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the name Viktor Frankl. He was a Jewish, Austrian-born neurologist and psychologist who was interred in a concentration camp by the Nazis and who managed to live through it. And he talks about how a turning point for him in the experience was he was at a satellite of Dachau, and he and other prisoners were made to do this menial labor that was, bitter cold in the night. He said they were freezing. It was just really difficult to endure those types of circumstances. The physical suffering was incredible. And one of his fellow prisoners turned to him and said, let's just pray that our wives are okay and that they think we're okay, that they don't know we're going through this, so that they're at peace. And he said that idea of praying for his wife and calling forth the image of his wife and knowing how much he loved her in that moment caused him to say later, then I grasped the meaning of the greatest secret that human poetry and human thought and belief have to impart. The salvation of man is through love and in love. I understand how a man who has nothing left in this world still may know bliss, be it only for a brief moment in the contemplation of his beloved. In a position of utter desolation, when man cannot express himself in positive action, when his only achievement may consist in enduring his sufferings in the right way, in an honorable way, in such a position, a man can, through loving contemplation of the image he carries of his beloved, achieve fulfillment. Okay, well, hopefully most of us have never had or never will have to face those kinds of circumstances. But I think the key there is that this man in that moment still managed to feel his connection with love. When he turned his awareness to the love of his wife. He felt that vibration of love that the most heinous human acts, the most horrible conditions in the world couldn't touch. And his studies later showed that those who felt a purpose for surviving the concentration camps, if they felt, even if it was when I get out of here, I need to let the world know, it was some kind of positive thing to do, which is the impulse of love, they had a much greater survival rate than those who were just so overcome by the dire circumstances. And this was later corroborated by an article I read about a young girl whose parents died in the concentration camp and who became the guardian of her sister. And she said every single day when she could make sure her sister had survived, that she had taken care of her and she survived, she said, I actually felt joy. In the middle of this god-awful circumstance situation, she could feel joy just by caring for her sister and making sure her sister was all right. And remembering that after she made it through, she and her sister both did survive, you know, that awareness of how she could feel that in the midst of those circumstances made her a magnificent counselor, because she could tell people who were in pain, there's something bigger in you than this. And she could do it with conviction. So what I want to leave us with today is to remember that the false idea that we always need to transcend, to move beyond, is that we are separate from God. And when we can transcend that, we can have a more fulfilling and positive experience of life. So please know that there is nothing in your past, no circumstance today in your life that diminishes your value, that diminishes your capacity to be able to love and to accept love. You always have something to offer, no matter what. You always have something that's of value to others, and you are always worthy of being loved. Bring your awareness to that capacity to bring love into situations and be mindful of it. Like I said, bring your focus to how you can do that. Find ways to express love. A smile, a kind word, little acts of generosity, anything. And be mindful again of how good that feels. Keep doing that, and you've just tapped into the magic ingredient to a joyful, meaningful, fulfilling life. And remember, that magical ingredient lies within you. Let's pray. Thank you. Thank you so much. So bringing our awareness to that energy of love, that presence of love, that presence of that one life, that one power that I call God, that is that pure vibration of love, love containing every form of goodness, that is always just seeking to experience and express itself throughout creation. I know that that life is my very life, as it is the life of each and every person here, every being everywhere. And so I speak this word knowing that if there's any area where we feel a constriction of love for ourselves, for others, an inability to feel good in the midst of circumstances, we are absolutely willing right now to release that and open to that flow of love that always lives within us, that shows us the way to experience and express some greater good in the moment, because goodness, God, lies within us always. We let this prayer be a prayer for our loved ones, for situations in the world that call to our attention, for anywhere that we feel that circumstances don't reflect the goodness of God. We hold those situations and beings in love, and we know that God's love is there, just ready to be revealed, and revealing itself and creating the healing in a most perfect way. We bless our church. We bless all churches everywhere, synagogues, temples, mosques, ashrams, all paths to God. And with a full and grateful heart for the love and goodness that God is always in and around us, I release this word, knowing it is so. I let it be, and so it is. And together we say, Amen.